Plain and simple, we're going to do a tier ranking video of a selection of the first 3,000 penguins. Now, this is a sort of fun variation on this ongoing series that we've been doing on my channel, which is reading the first 3,000 penguin books and talking about them. I'm going to leave a link to the website, a brilliant website in which you can actually look at the full catalogue of the first 3,000 penguin books. So for those of you that are not familiar with the series, I'll leave a link and you can check out the earlier episodes. In short, Alan Lane was one of the founders of Penguin Books, and he started publishing classic and contemporary fiction as well as criticism, history, crime fiction in high quality affordable editions in 1935. And this was before the invention of the ISBN number, so these books were actually numbered on the spine from 1 all the way through to what eventually went as far as 3,000. But we're doing it not in order from 1 to 3,000. We're kind of jumping around according to sort of what I have to hand on my shelves and what's been on my mind or something that I've reread. I haven't read all 3,000, but I have read quite a significant number of them. I would love to know how many of these you have read of the first 3,000. Check out the link to the website and you can actually go through those 3,000. Now, that was the preamble, that was the introduction. I've got 20 here from the first 3,000 that I've read at least once. Some of them I have read multiple times. And let's dive into it. So I'll show you my categories here. I've got Melt My Mind, which is just books that really left their imprint on me and I will certainly be rereading. Then I've got Mesmerize, fantastic books, not quite in that sort of all-time favorite category and strong chance of rereading these. My Eyes, just pretty tepid, pretty forgettable, pretty placid and flaccid, dare I say, and colorless. Meant to Forget, these books are really bottom of the barrel, just not worth the paper they're printed on and not something I would ever recommend. And then Fossilized, now, is a book that was just an absolute crime against humanity or an atrocity, 3 hours of my life that I'll never get back. In the series, so we've done about 50 books of these 3,000. We're going to do another 20 now. First up, we've got Almayer's Folly by Joseph Conrad. This is number 36. I've read quite a few of Joseph Conrad's books. I've talked about a few of them on the channel. Almayer's Folly was actually his first novel that he published. He was 39. He sort of came out of nowhere. He'd never had anything published before. He'd had this very extraordinary life of adventure and strange vicissitudes, his parents dying when he was very young, but him being saved from the orphanage by a kind uncle. Then, he was of Polish origin, but his uncle paid for him to have French and English lessons. And then he went on to write masterfully in the English language. Now, he's a very unpopular figure. He's not in vogue at all. And some of his books have been heavily chastised by esteemed critics and so forth. I think some of the disparagement of Conrad is over the top and some of it is justified. Some of his books have been unfairly castigated and others sort of probably deserve the criticism. Now, Almayer's Folly, his first novel, is not really talked about all that much. This was pretty tepid stuff. We're off to a bad start here. Meant to Forget, it's really by far one of his weaker novels, which can be forgiven because it was him in this inchoate, emergent stage of his career. It's his first novel, so it's not dreadful as far as first novels go, but it's pretty nasty racist elements that are not really interrogated in ways that his later work does. So he has, many kind of maritime and imperial stories of, European men sort of trying to make their fortune or court disaster in various far-flung places of the world. And his depiction of, peoples native to those places is often very distasteful and at times flagrantly racist. But in his best work, he is revealing the prejudices and the horrors of those values, and showing the hypocrisy of Western values really massively. And I think that element of his work is often overlooked. But Almayer's Folly is just pretty bald discrimination and not a very compelling story, and quite implausible. It's about this sort of bitter, disenfranchised and disillusioned Dutchman who's living in some remote part of Malaysia, and he has these illusions of grandeur, or these kind of unrealistic hopes of rediscovering his European prestige and reputation for himself and his daughter. And it's a story about all of the ways in which his ideals and his self-deception are brought to rubble. And yeah, it's pretty swampy, it's pretty malarial, but not with the stunning delirium of Heart of Darkness. It's lacking that strata of resonance that his best work has. Right, let's move along here. I've got 111, Arthur Conan Doyle, The Hound of the Baskervilles. This is surprisingly gothic. It's Arthur Conan Doyle. It's a Sherlock Holmes, of course, if anyone wasn't aware of that. And it's sublimely fun and spooky and spectral. And it's not a literary masterpiece, but it does its job very well. And it's a strange one because Sherlock Holmes is sort of absent for a lot of the story, and we have a lot more of Watson, and it's an epistolary sort of filling in of the gaps. Dr. Watson is writing letters to Holmes about the strange occurrence of this kind of beast on the moors, and or the Hound of the Baskervilles to be more precise. But yeah, it's a fun read. I'm gonna try and, because we've got 20 books here, I'm gonna try and not waffle on about all of them. So, Hound of the Baskervilles. Ooh, the problem I've got here is Mesmerize and Man My Eyes. There seems to be a pretty big gap between these. I don't think I've thought out my categories particularly excellently. But we're too far in now. I'm not going to start fiddling around. Maybe I could. Oh yeah, I can actually do that. You know what I'm going to do? I'm going to change this category to barbecue lacking spice or something. I don't know. Does that? So it's wholesome enough, it's filling enough, but it's just missing something. Yeah, even that. And then Mesmerize seems there still seems to be a bit of a gap here anyway. I don't want to waste you guys' time, so let's just Melt My Mind, Mesmerize, Barbecue Lacking Spice. Mesmerize is also a bit strong, hey? Melt My Mind is clearly, a masterpiece. Good. Barbecue, I don't really know where I'm getting these from, pulling them out of somewhere. I think it's December, it's cold and grey, and I'm maybe dreaming of a summer barbecue and some sunshine. Good barbecue. It's pretty weird. Put it in good barbecue. Okay, by the way, this tier list was made by Open Tier Boy. I will leave a link, opentierboy.com. Amazing free resource if anyone of you out there wants to make a tier list video. This seems to be working really well, so great job to Open Tier Boy. Right, next we've got Salome and Other Plays by Oscar Wilde. It's number 600 in the first 3,000. Now, I've talked about Oscar Wilde quite extensively on this channel. I've read everything that he's written and reread quite a lot of it. I'm a big Oscar Wilde fan. And Salome and Other Plays, it's A Woman of No Importance, An Ideal Husband, and Salome. Right, back to our tier list. Salome itself is this kind of weird Baroque fever dream. It's got a kind of vaudeville sort of extravagance and indulgence to it in this kind of period piece way, in which it's this biblical story and it's about sin and extravagance and gluttony and sort of repressed sensuality and foreboding. Yeah, that brings down this book in my rankings a bit, because An Ideal Husband and A Woman of No Importance are both fantastic plays. I think I'm going to put it in good barbecue. It would maybe be in Melt My Mind if it wasn't for Salome, which is one of my least favorite of Oscar Wilde's works. Then we've got number 934, Right Ho Jeeves by PG Wodehouse. There's quite a lot of PG Wodehouse in the first 3,000, couple of, at least two of which we've talked about in this series. So like I said, check out the other episodes. PG Wodehouse, for those of you who haven't read him, he was this English comic writer. Now he has this great comedy duo, one of the original comedy duos of Bertie Wooster and his manservant Jeeves. Now Bertie Wooster is this cavalier, airheaded nincompoop of extraordinary wealth, generational wealth, or intergenerational wealth. He's part of the sort of elite of the British aristocracy, but he hasn't lifted a finger to do a day's work in his life. And it's this great duo because Bertie Wooster himself is completely dumb, but super wealthy. And his manservant is just of the working class, of the servant class, Jeeves, but he's like this mastermind. So there's a brilliant irony there. And there's a very subtle critique of class distinctions and sort of unearned wealth and of the upper classes of British society. Now, Wodehouse was sort of born at the periphery of that. He had very wealthy relatives, although his parents were not mega wealthy. In terms of his identity and his position in society, it's sort of 1 foot in and 1 foot out of the grand hall of gilded luxury. And in a similar way, I think, to Oscar Wilde, who's also a great satirizer and a great critic of upper class values and morals, because Oscar Wilde's father was also this kind of debonair elite, but not with, untrammeled, unfettered mega wealth. But Wilde is much more scathing in his critique. I think Wodehouse, is not always, it's more entertainment based with a subtle undercutting and ironizing. But anyway, let's just crack on here. Right Ho Jeeves. Now the thing with Wodehouse is that he's funny. He can be very, very funny, but it's quite episodic and it's quite formulaic. He found this great formula, and it's the bread and butter of his very successful and popular career. So it gets a little bit samey, it gets a bit repetitive, and Right Ho Jeeves, I'd already read several Wodehouse books when I read Right Ho Jeeves, and then for me, it just didn't stand out. So I'm going to go ahead and put it in barbecue lacking spice, but it's maybe a harsh critique, because if I'd maybe read Right Ho Jeeves first, I would have thought, oh, wow, how funny, how quirky, how ridiculous. It's all about complete exaggeration and over-the-top set pieces. And anyway, let's crack along here. Right, now 1021 is another Oscar Wilde. Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, great stuff. Let's just have a look and see if there's other works included. What did I say, 1021? Just going to have a look here at the list again. Yeah, there are other works here. Okay, I'm glad I looked at this. Lord Arthur Savile's Crime, The Canterville Ghost, The Model Millionaire, The Young King, The Fisherman and His Soul, The Happy Prince, The Portrait of Mr. W.H., and The Devoted Friend. Okay, so this is actually a whole bunch of Oscar Wilde fiction. Let's go back to our tier list. Lord Arthur Savile's Crime it's okay. It's not my favorite, but The Canterville Ghost is wonderful. Wonderful, hilarious spoof of ghost stories. This is a strange mix again, because like The Fisherman and His Soul is Wilde doing his sort of adoration of folk stories. He was a big fan of the Brothers Grimm and their ilk, E.T.A. Hoffman and the like. So it's not my favorite side of Wilde. It's a bit of a strange mix here of stories, and I'm going to go ahead and put it in barbecue lacking spice, just for those folksy kind of fairy tale parts that kind of get on my nerves. And I have actually reread those parts of Wilde too, and I still found them a bit long in the tooth. Great Expectations by Charles Dickens. This one we're gonna just go nice and quick. Melt My Mind. It's one of my favorite books, certainly one of my favorite Dickens, maybe up there with David Copperfield and A Tale of Two Cities. Melt My Mind, yeah, great. It's only Dickens in the first 3,000, by the way, which is a bit disappointing. But yeah, let's move along. James Joyce, Dubliners, Melt My Mind. Love it, love it, love it. If you haven't read Dubliners, it's really fantastic stuff. Then J.D. Salinger, Catcher in the Rye. Sorry, Dubliners is 1,144. Then we've got 1,248. J.D. Salinger, The Catcher in the Rye. I don't think I need to say too much about this because it's one of the most read books. Now, I've read everything that Salinger has published. We are waiting for his son, who is the executor of his estate, to edit this supposed wealth of books and stories that he continued to write until his death in obscurity, in this very, very enclosed and charged silence and sort of seclusion. And we've been waiting, and they were supposed to come out in 2016. We didn't hear anything, so who knows what the story is there. I can't wait for the rest of those J.D. Salinger works to be released. But in the meantime, we've only got 4 or 5 books, and I've read them all. I'm sure many of you have too. And The Catcher in the Rye is a masterpiece of voice and of this adolescent rage and contempt for convention, and it's so good. I think I need to reread this book, to be honest. I haven't read it in quite a while, and it doesn't quite sort of rank up there with Franny and Zoe or his short stories, but yeah, I'm going to put it in Good Barbecue because it certainly deserves the accolades. All right, Lord of the Flies, number 1,471. Again, this is such a universally loved and well-read book that I don't need to say much about it. It's a children's classic, but very much readable for adults as well, and was inspired by Robinson Crusoe. Probably one of the most famous sort of adaptations or retellings of Robinson Crusoe. And yeah, I really loved it when I read it. It haunted me. I read it when I was very young, 13 or 14. So it's very much due for a reread, and I'm going to put it in Good Barbecue. Next, we've got 1,477. Another James Joyce, A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man. We're really hitting some of these very, very popular works, which helps me to keep the rhythm here. Because, yeah, many of you guys know these books quite well. But A Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man is Joyce's coming-of-age novel, his Bildungsroman, the next step after Dubliners towards his magnum opus of Ulysses, and then his strange, nightmarish garrulousness that was Finnegan's Wake. And I love Ulysses and I love Dubliners, but Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, as much as I appreciate it, I can't really say that I love it. I found the sort of endless blast of epiphany and this kind of preciousness of his tacit emergent genius to be a little grating at times, but it's Good Barbecue. Then we've got number 1,491, Vladimir Nabokov, Pnin. Nabokov, he's well known, but Pnin is not a book that I hear talked about very much. It's part of his sort of American trilogy with Lolita and Pale Fire, and he wrote this book in English, and so brilliant and so funny. It's a book full of pathos and bathos. This stumbling, mumbling, crummy Russian professor in America who's just not in touch with the sort of American psyche, and he's a bit of a law unto himself, and he's clumsily, mumblingly, blusteringly, blunderingly tumbling through the scene after scene. And like all Nabokov, it's not just a straightforward tale. There are undercurrents and hints and echoes of some malevolence, some darker meanness of spirits woven into the narrative that you get glimpses of, and as the story rolls on, you start to suspect that something that not is all quite as it seems, and there's an unreliableness to the narration. And I don't want to give away more of it than that, because it's really worth reading, and it's a great book. I'm going to put it in Melt My Mind because I think it's a masterpiece and one of my favorite books. Oh no, internet connection. Okay, I had a very scary moment in which my internet connection dropped out, and I'm just very scared of losing these. I'm very scared of losing these this tier list that I've been making. We have hit a bit of a technical snag here. Okay, this is just super annoying, but my internet dropped out and I've lost the images. Next up we have Breakfast at Tiffany's by Truman Capote. I'm going to try and navigate this technical glitch. Number 1607 is a fantastic book. It's a story of coziness, of voice, there's a kind of a sense of the voyeurism to it. This, very tragic but glamorous figure being portrayed by a much less colorful and vivid narrator, but yet with a real sharpness and artfulness of description. And I loved it when I read it. I'm definitely due for a reread. I'm going to put it up here in Melt My Mind. Next, we have number 1648, Lucky Jim by Kingsley Amis. Now, I've talked about this book several times on my channel, and it's one of my favorite novels of all time. It's hilarious. It's got the best writing about being polluted, as James Joyce would say, being drunk. It's so brilliant in its ridiculousness, and what it does so well is capture the gap between sort of social nicety and actual internal monologue, and how this very self-lacerating and pompous clown of a character of Jim Dixon, how he navigates the absurdity of his life as a kind of medievalist who hates medievalism. It's the original campus novel, and it also shows the sort of mind-numbing aspects of academia and the kind of redundancies in very, very comical ways. Next we have number 1699, and this is Homage to Catalonia by George Orwell, and it's brilliant work of Orwell's non-fiction. I much prefer his non-fiction to his fiction. I've read, I think, almost everything that Orwell has published. I need to double check that, but Homage to Catalonia is fantastic reportage, war writing, gritty, very visceral and shocking, and showing the deplorable and pitiful aspects of war. And it is good barbecue. Next we've got number 1762, Albert Camus, The Fall. I've talked about Camus on this series and elsewhere on my channel. Now, The Fall, it's strange. It's this kind of hypnotic, slanted, troubling, brooding consciousness. This voice babbling away about the absurdity of life, and it's got a very beautiful setting. It's actually set in Amsterdam, a city that I lived in for many years. Jade green canals and the white snowy bridges. It's the evocation of Amsterdam is gorgeous. The characters are very unlikable, and it's certainly not my favorite Camus. So I will put it in barbecue, lacking spice. Although I need to reread it, and maybe I'll change my view on a reread. All right, we're getting closer. Next we've got The Heart of the Matter by Greene. Again, I've talked about Greene a lot. We spent time in Greenland on my channel, and it's got one of the most, I don't want to give away the plot, but the denouement of the novel is absolutely brilliant. It's a real masterpiece of psychic pain, but it's very bleak. It's dire and grubby and full of rats and vultures. I can't quite put it in the melt my mind category. I'm going to put it in good barbecue. Okay, 1792, another Greene, The Quiet American. This is one of my favorite novels of all time, and I've discussed it at least twice on the channel. So I will leave a link to another video in which I give it the full treatment, or I give it a bit more of a treatment. But so I'm just going to keep things ticking along here. The Quiet American, melt my mind. It's probably my favorite Graham Greene novel. Next, we've got 1865, Exile in the Kingdom, another Camus. These are short stories. I never hear this book talked about, but it's a surprisingly moving and thought-provoking book. It's Camus again, using this extended metaphor of isolated communities in this vast, unforgiving, implacable desert, and the way that represents the kind of loneliness of our place in the universe and our search for meaning and connection in spite of that massive anonymity and vastness of the material universe. And I will put it in yeah, I've now sold it as if it's like really great, but I think that, yeah, it's him playing with these ideas and these metaphors, but maybe not with the level of superbness and superlative exactitude of The Stranger or The Plague. So I'm going to put it in, barbecue lacking spice. Not all of the stories are so memorable. So as you see, we haven't hit fossilize at all, but let's just wrap up here. We've got 2 more to go. We've got 1882, Ernest Hemingway, The Snows of Kilimanjaro and Other Stories. Yeah, Hemingway is not a likable person. Oh, I've missed one here. We'll come back to that. We'll just do this one. Hemingway is not a very likable person, but he was an exceptional writer who transformed, the way that we understand descriptive prose and narrative and voice, and just the stripped down but very accurate and sinuous, muscular, non-frill prose that is so, he has the ability to be so moving with such a paucity of extravagance. He really strips down to the bare bones and infuses his writing with such immense power. It's going to go in good barbecue. Do we have space for it? Yes, we do. Now, I've missed one here, number 1572, which is Franz Kafka, Metamorphosis and Other Stories. Well, Kafka, you just got to read Kafka. It's not pleasant. It is very disturbing, and there's a kind of unctuous, oily scariness to Kafka, frustrating and claustrophobic, and Metamorphosis and Other Stories is some of his best writing. So I'm going to put it in Melt My Mind. So yeah, that was our tier list for 20 of the first 3,000 penguins. Thanks so much for watching. I do apologize for the technical glitch. We got through it in the end. I think I'll have to see how the editing goes, but do let me know what you think of these 20 books. How differently would you rate them? Check out my other books in the series. Let me know what you think of the first 3,000 penguins. Thanks so much for watching, and speak to you guys all soon.